back to this course on Custom Cabinet Planner. Today we'll continue looking at the various sections of the Procedures page, starting with the Field Measure Procedures section. Keep in mind that one of our objectives is to make this app our single source of truth, everything about a project available to everyone in a single location, and that they can access that information from the smartphone in their pocket, or a tablet, or a PC. Let's begin. So as we come into the Field Measure Procedures section, we only have one subgroup called Field Measure, and here we have setup, process, and maintenance like we've had in all the others. You could have, if your company does both, maybe you would look at them differently of Field Measure Commercial versus Field Measure Residential. Maybe you do different things, so certainly could duplicate this one, create a second one, and modify it to adapt to that other methodology, whatever that might be. So again, we have the supplies you'll need, and you see there's quite a few of these that have links so that you could either access the website specific to the item or somewhere where it could be purchased, like Amazon.com, something like that. And then again, we're popping into our project data because we are now out in the field. We are actually going to the job site, possibly for the first time, and we want to make certain that we find the location for this water shutoff location, find the location for this electrical panel. Hopefully we've already gotten these codes if we need them. If it's a gated neighborhood and we need to have the gate code to be able to get into the neighborhood. If there's a garage door code that we'll need to be able to get in through the garage door if no one's home, or if there's a door code to get into one of the access doors of the home. Maybe it's an electronic doorknob, but maybe it's also just a realtor's box, something like that. So we're wanting to have this information so that when we go to Field Measure, we can get into the property to Field Measure. And in this particular section, in the processes piece of this, it's really not anything unique to field measuring that we are peeking into the room selections. We've looked at those multiple times. We just simply have instructions about how to go about that. And then when we get to the maintenance section, there is some instructions about what we might do with what we've gathered on the field measurements. I personally prefer the Photo Measures app to gather those field measurements. And my preferred method of getting that into this app would be to transfer the photo measures to my Dropbox. That seems to work best. It allows me to put them where I want them. If I import directly from Photo Measures into Notion, as I describe here, it creates a page, and that's fine for a lot of people, but it's its own page, and all of the field measurements live on its own page rather than room specific. And if you're measuring multiple rooms, then you can solve that too. There's multiple ways of going about this, but I've given you some suggestions about how to best do this. The primary objective here is to communicate well between somebody field measuring the project and a separate designer, or to have these images. The Photo Measures app is an image of the wall that you're field measuring, and so you can see what's in that wall, or if it's already sheetrocked, you can see where the plumbing is, you can see if there's an AC vent in the floor that the cabinets are going to cover. Things that you might not remember from going out and field measuring, you can see, or that second person gets that context. So that's it for Field Measure Procedures. Now let's jump down here into our design procedures. Again, here I only have KCD, but if you use Cabinet Vision or Mosaic or one of the other design solutions, just click on the 6 dots, duplicate, and then just modify that one and keep this one just in case someday in the future you might find that you want to try or actually switch to KCD, or to be able to reference this later. So I would just duplicate it rather than just modify it or delete it and add something from scratch. Alright, so we're going to jump into the setup here. And I said I wasn't going to cover the bullet points or checkboxes themselves or numbered lists, but I do want to touch on this one. It's good to have some sort of rules around how you name your drawings, how you name your estimates, how you name your proposals. And we have kind of stumbled across over years of refining this, that ideally the first draft of a drawing should be a preliminary. It shouldn't be REV or revision 1 because it's not a revision yet. It is a preliminary drawing. It is the first draft of the drawing. So in this case, we're saying that if we were going to name a job, and I don't really have any preferences of what happens before this. Some people like to use the street address or lot number only to reference projects, but this is referencing, this happens to be the builder's name, the lot number, and then preliminary. And so the very first copy would be, so that we just have some structure and that we move through the sequence of that structure, that the very first copy would be Chapman 114 preliminary. We do try to leave no spaces in names. It's not absolutely necessary, but it's just good practice for anything happening on computers and in the cloud that we don't leave spaces. So you can use hyphens or underscores. I prefer underscores if I'm just representing a space, and then hyphens if I want to separate things, and then I also like to use the Camelback font, and that would make the distinction between the first section and the second section. And then when we take those drawings, let's say we meet with the customer, we meet with them about the preliminary drawings, and they say, I need you to change this, this, and this. When we present those revised drawings, then we would have Chapman 114 revision 001. I know that you probably would never get to 100, but I do want to at least use 01 so that when I get to 10, if I do get to 10, and every now and then that does happen, that they still sort right. I don't want 10 to be above 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I want 10 to be after 9 in my file structure. So that's why we do that. So just wanted to touch on that naming structure. Another thing that we like to do in KCD, somewhat of a shortcoming, is it doesn't ask you to name the first room. It asks you to name every room past that. So we're just reminding you to name that first room. So I don't want to cover all the checkboxes, but I do want to touch on some of them that are important. Then one of the really cool things about having something like Notion to do these things, the engine behind what we're doing, now we have what we're calling here cabinet height and position calculator. But what's happening here is this is just the name field. Anytime you see the capital and lowercase a, that just means this is a name, a typed text. We can't really do much with that field, but we need to identify it in some way. A lot of times that's the job name or whatever. So here I'm just identifying this as an 8-foot wall, giving you some samples. What I probably would do, and what I typically do when I'm doing this for someone, is I'll type the room name here. I would just type kitchen here as opposed to 8 foot, but it doesn't really matter what you type there. And then I want to put the wall height that we've measured when we were out field measuring the project. So I'm going to type that in here. And the floor may have been there or may not have been there. The ceiling may or may not be there. So if I need to, I'm going to put in a floor thickness and a ceiling thickness. If I'm measuring from a subfloor to a framed ceiling, but no sheetrock yet, I can also use this ceiling feature to determine the position of the soffit. So I might say the ceiling height is 2471 and that the floor is going to be 19 millimeters or 21 millimeters or whatever thick, and then I might say this is like 256 millimeters or 359 millimeters or something like that, identifying how far down the soffit is framed. And so I'm representing that space. That will subtract that from what we call our wall height, and this is what we would enter into KCD in the field it's asking for the wall height. And then for all of those that use suspension system, you know that you can't take your cabinets all the way up to the soffit or ceiling. You need to leave a little bit of room so that you can get your hooks on the steel rail. So we're saying we want to be a minimum of 26 millimeters from the ceiling. It can be more than that, but it can't be less than that. And then we identify our toe height, and then we identify the upper bottom position. Where do we want the bottom of the upper cabinets? And from here on, everything else, for the most part, many of these are a calculation. Anytime you see the sum icon in front of it, that means that it's a formula, that the field is performing some sort of math function. And so in this case, it's doing the math on what we've told it. Basically, this wall height minus this, and this, so it's 2414. That's going to be the top position. But it's also, in the background, the formula is actually trying to make sure that the cabinet height to be divisible of 32. This is giving us an upper top position that is an in-system number. If you don't care about that, then you don't even have to use this. But if you do care about that, this will give you a number that will always be in system. And then this tells us what our actual clearance is. Now we said we wanted a minimum of 26, and this is saying, well, we actually got it this time. But down here, if we had this combination, then we would have 41. So sometimes it would be something more than 26, never less than 26. Then it tells us what the upper cabinet height is. All of these things we'll use in just a minute on the shop standards. If we're going to stack cabinets, we could come in here and pick, and these are all divisibles of 32, but we could pick one of these being that top height, what the top cabinet height would be, and then this would tell us what the bottom cabinet height is going to be if we do that. So it would be a total cabinet height of 1024, and if we put something in here, it's just going to subtract whatever we put in here from that and give us the stacked bottom cabinet. So then we'd have an upper and a lower cabinet. Then we want to enter our crown height and our frieze height, and we can play with these things. These are again increments of 32, so 64, 96, and 128 would be our frieze heights. And you could make it 32, or you could make it anything you want if you don't care about being in system. But we're basically going to do some math here and tell you what KCD is going to ask us. How much do you want your crown to overlap your frieze or top rail, or in case of their face frame cabinets, the face frame, but how much do you want it to overlap? We're going to do this on frieze and a full access cabinet. So we're saying that this crown sticks down from the top of the crown at the ceiling to the bottom of the crown, that it's 76 millimeters tall, or 3 inches tall. Down here it's 3.5 inches tall. And then we're saying we're going to have a frieze height of 64, and that's telling us that that crown mold is going to overlap that frieze mold by 50 millimeters, and that we're going to have 14 millimeters of that frieze showing. And so if we wanted to change this to a taller frieze mold so that we get a larger frieze reveal, we can see what the results of that is. So still a 76 millimeter crown, but with a frieze height of 96, now we'll show 46 millimeters of frieze, and that's more desirable than this 14. If the ceiling's out of level, this will telegraph it. This won't telegraph it as much. All right, so that's the cabinet height and position calculator. Again, this is one of the super strong features of Notion, to be able to create these things and just use them over and over and over again. And then these shop standards, if you're a KCD user, you know that if you don't answer the shop standards questions, every time you drop a cabinet, you're going to have to type in dimensions that you wouldn't have to type in if you do answer them. But one of the cool things about Notion is we can come in here and we can say, not only are these all of the shop standards in the Cabinotch Full Access Library, line by line, but we've come in here and we've said, hey, here's a legend to tell you what these colors mean. I've color coded them, and this tells you what they mean. So on these orange text items, make sure you check every single one of those. So that one, that one, that one. You need to look at that and make sure it's right. The ones that are orange backgrounds, you only need to look at those. You can see there's one here, a couple here, if you're going to stack or stagger cabinets. These gray ones, typically you're going to do that one time and you're never going to look at those again. Not 100% true, but mostly true. You don't have to look at these. That's something that you don't change job to job typically. And you can change this. If it is something you look at every time, if you change fillers from job to job, then you could change this to orange, and then it would be something you would look at every single time you start a job. And then the red background ones are ones that KCD's kind of deprecated and they're not working anymore. So that legend tells somebody new especially kind of how to go through this list, and you can see where we have a lot of items on this list and only a couple down here toward the bottom. It's nothing down here we need to even look at. A whole bunch of it doesn't even work. It's been deprecated, but we have a couple here we want to look at every time, and then we've got some notes and explanations about what we might need to do there. And then we've got a couple here, couple here. So we're taking a list of 100 and some odd items and saying you only need to look at about a dozen of these. That's really helpful, saves a lot of time. Then let's jump into the process section of this. And here, this is kind of new for us. We've moved these field measurements from the project page to the room page. And so this is a portal into the room page. And this portal is being looked at in a gallery type format. And so if we had multiple rooms, typically here we're only looking at one room, but some places we'll be looking at multiple rooms. There would be multiple rooms here, but in this case we're only wanting to look at the 4437 La Granada kitchen, and so that's what we're looking at here. But there would be multiple images. Now these images are not actually that job. These are some other job that we actually did at some point in time. So these are our field dimensions that we got using photo measures. You can see we've just literally stretched arrows. That's how the program works. You're able to pull a line and then type in the dimension, and we're measuring with a digital field measuring device. And we've got all the dimensions for this project, which would make it really easy to design the kitchen if you weren't the guy that went out and field measured, because now you've kind of seen what the guy that went out there and field measured saw. And I do take the time, and it's really easy. Again, the 6 dots allows you to move things, so I could move these pictures into order. So they don't always end up in the order of the room, but we always talk about that we want to design a kitchen, and we want to think this way all the time, of primary wall, the first wall with cabinetry on it, the primary wall with cabinetry on it. If this was a U-shaped kitchen and there were cabinets on this wall, we would want to start over here. There are actually cabinets on every wall here, but this was kind of the starting point, primary wall. There's no corner cabinets here, so we started here. This is wall 1, and then we're just going around this room clockwise. So this represents this wall over here, and when we get to here, this represents this wall over here, and this represents this wall over here. So we're just going clockwise. It doesn't really matter whether you go clockwise or counterclockwise, but in KCD you can navigate walls by a little gray bar by clicking on it, and if you draw it clockwise or counterclockwise, you can just primary click or secondary click on the mouse button and move from wall to wall, and you keep the context of here's the return of the blind cabinet, or here's the diagonal cabinet from one wall's perspective, and here it is from another wall's perspective. So we want to try to do that. So popped out of there, and we're right back where we were in this Field Measures portal. Then I want to talk just briefly about these red notes. We want to use these everywhere they're needed. Anytime you have someone that comes and asks you a question, the objective would be to answer their question, but then go put that answer into your procedures so that the next person that has that question already has the answer. So that's what all these red notes are, is trying to answer somebody's question before they ever ask it. Then we have a door calculator down here. So if you're field measuring and it's rough openings, again, you're going to put in some dimensions here of what the rough opening is and what the trim width is, and it's going to calculate for you what what size door we want to put in KCD or Cabinet Vision or Mosaic or whatever you're using. This will tell you what size door you want to put there, and then it'll calculate the center based on the rough opening space from the left to right. And if there was no sheetrock, you add the sheetrock thickness here and it will calculate that center for you. So that's a really handy feature. Then again, because we're in this design portion, we have the appliance list again, because we need to know what appliances are going to go in this project. So we'll come to this list and say, okay, we've got this refrigerator and this range and this microwave drawer and this beverage chiller and this dishwasher. And here we have the opening widths. And that's really useful information, saves a lot of time. And we have a appliance dimension converter, and this is just simply for when you're sitting there with the dimensions from the manufacturer. If you're an Imperial guy and you've got dimensions for a European appliance, you might want to be converting from metric to imperial, which would use this one. If you have KitchenAid or one of the American manufacturers, most of them have both. Sometimes it's not very consistent, but if you need metric and the specifications are imperial, you would put the imperial dimension in here and it'll give you the metric dimension. If you have metric dimensions and you need imperial, you just literally pop in here. Instead of doing the calculator, it's much quicker to just type the dimension in here and it'll give you the conversion for it. Then we have this really valuable section called Design Review. Far too many cabinet makers skip this step. All of us need kind of a double check. Did we do everything we were supposed to do? We had this list of things we were supposed to do, but did we do them? Just double check. Maybe another person does the double check. Whatever you think is valuable to your company, but this is kind of a double check. Did I cover all my bases? Did I make sure everything worked? And then we'll see these multiple times, these KCD options, because they're hidden in KCD. Again, if you're not using KCD, this is irrelevant to you, but KCD hides the options. You've got to specifically go to where they live. There's only 4 of them in the Cabinetry Full Access Library in KCD, but those 4 can bite you because they're hidden if you're not paying attention. So we're just reminding you of that. We talked about it earlier in these instructions, but now we're reminding you, double check that again. Make sure that you did that. And again, we're going to come down into our maintenance area and we're going to see that we have a project data. And here we're going to take whatever we created here, the drawings, and upload those drawings and then schedule the design meeting and then meet with the client and make any notes about that. And ultimately, when we get done with that process, we will change the room status and change the assignee. So that covers everything I wanted to touch on in this 3rd course on the procedures page. Up next, we will continue working down our sequence of events list, looking at more sections of the procedures page. Thanks for watching.